This morning we're going to continue our look at the fruit of the Spirit. We've looked at love, and we looked at joy. And I don't know how you feel about those two, but those are pretty difficult to maintain all the time, to be able to love completely as God loves, and to be joyful all the time, even in times of struggle. And I believe that this particular area of peace is just as difficult. I don't know if Paul decided to do the more difficult ones first, or if as we progress through you might find the latter few more difficult. But from Galatians chapter 5, verse 22 and 23 we read, "But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control." This word peace is an interesting word. If there are any women among us named Irene, this is where your name comes from. If you notice, it says that it is from the root word to join. And as much as I looked at the word, it was very difficult to connect the thoughts, but obviously this is just the word that we used to describe what peace is. It says by implication it means prosperity, and this is from Strong's Greek dictionary. And then Thayer's dictionary has this explanation for the word, for the meaning of the word itself. Peace is the tranquil state of a soul, assured of its salvation through Christ, and so fearing nothing from God, and content with its earthly lot. Now, I think when we discuss peace, it is a subject that is not very familiar to us. I remember a few years ago I found an illustration on peace, and it stated that the world has only known about 176 years of peace. I don't know how scientists and anthropologists or historians had calculated that. I don't know how they came up with that number, but obviously perhaps going through the history books and trying to find peace. But I would guess that we as mankind have never known peace. And yet here the Spirit expects us to be living a life of peace. Now I think there's a big contrast here in biblical terms of our peace between one another and the peace that we have between God and man. Those are two very different kinds of peace. Obviously, when God is involved, He does a much better job. He's more superior than us in every way, and therefore His concept of peace is very different to ours. But He also expects us to live like Him, because if we're going to be in step with the Spirit, we're expected to live at peace. Now consider this passage. It shows the connection between our peace between each other and the peace that we should have with God, out of Romans chapter 12. Paul says, "Do not repay anyone evil for evil. Be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everybody. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone." Now that's perhaps the greatest expectation in life, isn't it? If mankind as a creation has never really known peace, we don't really understand peace, yet God calls us to live at peace. He's asking for a lot. He expects a lot from us. I think we can tell by this passage that we should be at peace with each other. Notice the phrase, "in the eyes of everybody." In the eyes of everybody. Is it possible to please everyone? We agree that it isn't possible, isn't it? Sometimes it's even difficult to please ourselves. How can we please everybody else? Everybody else. And then he says that as far as it depends on us, though, we should be at peace with others. You see, we may not be at peace with others because of how they see us or what they want in their lives. So we may have war when we are at peace. Just shows how difficult peace is to maintain. It doesn't take long. It's not very difficult. It is not beyond our imagination for us to be at war with anybody at any time. And yet, this passage expects us to be at peace with everyone all the time. Now, I think the peace that we're talking about when we speak of being in step with the Spirit is not so much the peace that we have with each other, even though that's important. I believe that peace is the peace that we have with God first, and primarily with God first, and then that affects the peace that we have with each other. I think our biggest struggle as human beings is we try to be at peace with each other first. And then we think by having peace here, somehow we find peace with God. That is a human way of thinking. That is a faulty way of thinking. You see, because if we are at peace with each other all the time, unfortunately we've compromised a few things, haven't we? I had a friend once who was traveling down the highway, and he was driving, there were a few others in the car, and we were talking about what we were about to do. We were going over to somebody's house, and we were about to have an intervention with them. And as we were going down the road, one of the people in the vehicle noticed that the driver was driving very fast and took offense at that and said, you know, you should really obey the speed limit. You should obey the laws of the land. And the driver turned and said, you know what? I'm operating under a higher power. And he just put his foot down and went faster. I don't know about you, but you see, that's going to cause a little bit of problem, isn't it, in your life, if you live that way. You see, the truth is, if we are at peace with God, many times we are at war with man. Trying to maintain peace is very difficult. Would you say that we live in peaceful times? Maybe here we are. But it doesn't take much to look into the newspaper or to turn on the television and notice that there's war somewhere else. And yet we're expected to live in peace. I want us to consider why this morning, why we should live at peace, why we should be in peace, why we should be peaceful people. If the Spirit is leading us to do this, what is behind it? What is the reasoning behind the Spirit wanting us to be at peace, asking us to almost do the impossible, to maintain something that is virtually impossible to maintain, that it's something worth pursuing? First, I notice that the reason why we should be at peace is because God is a God of peace. Out of this passage here, 1 Corinthians 14 and 33, for God is not a God of disorder, but a God of peace. Remember we spoke about love earlier, how God is defined as love. There are not very many places in the Bible where God defines himself a certain way, in a complete way. But would we say that God is a God of peace all the time? There are many passages in the Bible that prove a contradiction to that statement. You see, Jesus said, I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. Well, what did he mean by that? God is a God of peace, as far as it depends on him. As far as he can do it, he's going to live at peace with us. And therefore we should be at peace with him. I think it's very difficult for us to talk about this subject of peace because it's such an absolute subject, isn't it? When we think of peace, we think of complete peace and tranquility. We think of a complete, whole comfort and joy in life. We think of everything good and everything wonderful in times of peace. But what's interesting is as stated earlier, we are in a time of peace, aren't we? But if we look far enough down the road, we realize there is war somewhere else. So is it fair for God to expect of us to live a life of peace when we know it's virtually impossible? I think we should strive for peace. God strives for peace. I think we see that in the way God has interacted with man. God could have quite easily done away with us many, many, many times. And yet He always tried to come with some sort of aspect of peace, some sort of covenant with us, some sort of agreement. God is always the one that does that first. And maybe that's how we should be today. If I should be at peace because God is at peace, then I should be the one who tries to make the relationship right. I should be the one who comes to mend the fence, to build the bridge. I should be the one who tears down the wall or the barrier. That's how I should be. If I'm living by the Spirit, then I'm about creating relationships. I'm not about destroying relationships. And this is what we find God to be. Satan is the destroyer. God is the creator. Satan is the one that would destroy all the relationships that he can. See, God is the one that wants to mend all the relationships he can. I believe we should be in step with the Spirit because that's how God is. He is at peace with us. It's interesting that even today, God is at peace with us. The gospel is for everyone, all the time, every generation. Our thoughts of Jesus on the cross are His hands extended out like this until the end. You see, God is at peace with us, but we may be at war with Him. But He is still at peace with us. As Christians, we have to be at peace with our world because of God. Notice the next reason. I believe we have to live in peace, be in step with the Spirit. That's what Jesus did. Because Jesus died for peace. Notice what Paul says in Colossians 1. He says, "For God was pleased to have all His fullness dwell in Him, and through Him to reconcile to Himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through His blood shed on the cross." To what lengths are we going to go to create peace? God went so far as to send His only Son to die for people who didn't even deserve it. I think this is what makes living in peace or at peace very difficult. You see, God, as I said earlier, is at peace with us, but we are not at peace with Him. The truth is, if we're going to be as Jesus was, a sacrifice to create peace, we're going to have to be sacrificed. Perhaps this is something that scares us. In order for me to create peace, to make peace, I have to sacrifice, don't I? I have to give of myself. And that's one of the most difficult things to do because we are so self-centered. We are so selfish. Do you have to be right all the time? Do you have to win all the time? Do you have to be first all the time? Do you have to be respected all the time? Do you have to be loved all the time? Do you have to be feared all the time? The list can go on and on and on. You see, the truth is the Christian is going to do anything, even to the point of death, to create peace. And I don't think it's necessarily, as I said earlier, the peace that we share with each other, but it's this peace that God shares with us. This is our mission, foremost. Do you realize that if you take this message of peace to many parts of the world today, you will be at war with the world? Right now we're at war. We're in a theological war with parts of the world. There are people in the world right now that will kill you for your beliefs, in spite of the fact that you extend the hand of peace. They will murder you anyway. Some have already paid that price. We can imagine doing that. But ultimately we do that anyway, don't we? We give up our lives anyway. Maybe we don't go out all in one event, but it's played out over a lifetime. We're going to sacrifice ourselves for our God, for the sake of peace. And the truth is, we can't have peace unless we do that. I think if you were to ask people today if peace was a reasonable thing to pursue, they would laugh at you. We even make fun of it, don't we? When we see those beauty pageant contestants, they ask them what would they want? World peace. We even have a symbol for it, don't we? It almost seems like it's impossible. Is it worth pursuing? Yes, because we're expected to. Will we be successful? No. Will we make peace with everyone? No. Will everyone be at peace with God? No. But if we're going to live as God expects us to live, we must try. This is our mission, to make peace, not just with our fellow man, but between man and God. Because we are at peace with God. And others can also have that peace. And finally, I think the most important thing for us as Christians to know is that we need to be in step with the Spirit, living a life of peace, because this is how we're going to be rewarded. This is how we are going to be blessed. This is how God has set up the kingdom. The kingdom is set up in the way that we live as He lives, and we are rewarded for that. Look at what Paul says in 2 Corinthians chapter 13. He says, aim for perfection. Ow. Aim for perfection. Listen to my appeal. Be of one mind. Live in peace. And the God of love and peace will be with you. You see, if we're out there in the world creating all kinds of discord at least, all kinds of disharmony, disunity, if we're out there burning every bridge we can, if we're out there building every wall we can, we will be nothing like God. God has done everything possible to create peace, and we need to do everything possible to be peacemakers ourselves, and we will be rewarded for that. We aren't going to be rewarded for the amount of enemies we make, for the amount of trouble we make, for the amount of trouble we leave behind. We're going to be known for the peace that we leave behind. As we think of what Jesus has already done for us, and the kind of character we have as our God, that peace is a part of who they are. It needs to be a part of who we are. God is a God of peace. His Son has proven that. And if we want to be rewarded for what we're doing, we need to live as He lived. We need to act as He acts. We need to care as He cares. Peace is a very tall order for mankind. We're not good at it. In fact, we're horrible at it. We have a terrible track record of peace. But I encourage you to think about what it means to live in the Spirit, and that we need to be people that are at peace. God wants us to be at peace. So we should live at peace because God is our peace. He is peace. We have made peace with Him, and He has made peace with us. He has shown us by His Son. His Son has done everything possible, even to the point of death, to pay the price for peace. And if we ever hope to be rewarded for the life that we live, we must live a life of peace. I encourage you to think about that this week as you go into a very probably hectic week. with many activities and many challenges. We need to find ways to create relationships with others. We need to find ways around barriers that hinder a connection with somebody. And doesn't our enemy really deserve that? Isn't the person that we want to avoid the most, or speak to the least, or have any contact with, aren't those the ones that need this? I encourage you to think about the week that's ahead of you and what it means to be a spiritual person and what it means to live in peace. We have a song that's prepared, and if you need anything, this would be the time to respond. Perhaps you've been studying and you know what the gospel means and what you need to do to obey it, and this is your opportunity as we stand, as we sing this song together.